Okay, we're going to talk about the channel mod. Now, I'm not really much for drilling holes in these. And yeah, you can take out this headphone jack and put a 6-position switch in, but it's really, this is a short radio, so there's not much room for a 6-position switch in there. So sometimes I'll come over here to this PA switch and I'll take it over, because who uses a PA, right? But since this one was upgraded and I removed that digital clock, there was this big old wiring harness in the back here, up and down for the clock. It switched it from 24 to 12 hours. Well, I'm going to use that for the extra channels now since I don't have a clock, right? That makes sense. It's a little awkward, but not too hard. So these two wires I isolated and I brought them over here to the PLL chip. I did the simple mod on this, nothing too complicated, because really this is going to go up to channel 80, and yeah, that's where I like my action, is above channel 40. I don't go down too much, so having an extra 40, having this go up to channel 80, perfect. So you can see here there's one pin, see if we can get that focusing. There's one pin that goes to ground here, and you just isolate that ground, solder a 4.7K resistor to that pin and ground, and then right here where the red wire is, that's the PLL voltage. It looks like I gotta remove some stuff there, but this voltage now will get switched to that pin. When the voltage is activated, that pin goes high. When you remove that voltage, the pin goes low because it's tied to ground, and that just flips it up 80 channels. So that's a real simple mod on these D858 chips. And now when I have the switch in the back, I go down, that's normal 40. If I put it up, that gets me up to channel 80. And as you can see here on the frequency counter, turn this upside down. Yeah, on this frequency counter, we'll turn that switch on. There you go, 27805. Sweet, huh? Hey guys, we're going to go over this frequency counter install and give you some of my pro tips on how to get rid of the noise, that screaming driver noise that bleeds into your radio receiver when these guys run without any kind of filters. So you can hear there's the audio on this. Turn that guy up. I don't hear any noise, and when you turn it down, that's usually when you hear it, because it's not a real heavy noise. Yep, nice and quiet. Alright, so basically how I get rid of that noise is, you got to do some experiments on each radio, because the ground is usually the key. Sometimes you got to move the ground around just to find the quietest spot. But usually it's right on that main capacitor of the power supply, but not always. So really, this is the tricks I go through. I'm using capacitors and a voltage regulator. This is an 8-volt voltage regulator, so the 14 volts of the radio comes in and the output is 8 volts. That will help drive this guy at a lower voltage, and that makes these drivers not scream as loud. Okay, the other thing I use is a resistor on the low side, like 150 to 200 ohms, and I'll isolate the load of this counter just a couple hundred ohms to give it a little isolation so there's not a massive ground loop. Hopefully that made sense. And then there's two tricks that you can do to these counters to help keep them quiet. See right there on the input, you see those two posts. Let's see if that will come in there. Yeah, that's a positive and a negative. So you can take one of these capacitors, don't get too large, about 200 to 300 microfarads, and you can attach that right to that input. That will help snuff anything out right on the input to this. And then the last trick here I can tell you is these pins on the back side. Now I've bent 2 of these just for illustration, but pins 2 and 3 are the output of the 5-volt regulator, which is right here. Yeah, a little hard to attach anything right there. So what I do is I attach a capacitor right here to pins 2 and 3. I believe 2 is ground and 3 is high, but I'm just talking off the top of my head here. Okay, so that will help snuff out those crazy sounds. Give you a little example here on the back of this radio. What I did, like I said, I mounted that transistor right to the switch, so I have the 12 volts coming right from the power supply, and then the output of that regulator goes right to the counter's input. And then on the low side, you see here, I have this low connected to a resistor to tie that into the ground, and that gives you just a little isolation for that noise to be kind of swamped out. But most of the time I can take these regulators, right, and just I cut off that middle finger because it's ground, and so is the tab. So I just solder that right to that negative post, the big old capacitor in there. That does a pretty good job most of the time. So that's my number 1 trick. Mount this right to there. But if that still gives you some noise, real faint noise, yeah, you got to isolate that ground with this resistor. Okay, that's a pro tip on how Be Cool Radios keeps these counters quiet. Yeah, takes a lot of experimenting to do, as you can see, but they're really cheap. They're about $15. You can tie them into the first IF or the end gate, but not all end gates will give you this results. Sometimes they go down instead of up, but this one luckily goes up, 10 kc count, so that's what I tapped into. Alright, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is the size of these. See, these guys are, looks like they're 5.3 millimeters, and this one here is 3.6, so you can see that's quite a bit of a difference. So these counters will fit in your big windowed, clock windowed CBs like a Madison, you know, those guys with a big clock radio in them. You can pull those clock radios and stick this thing right in there. But if your window's too small, like on these Radio Shack units, you see how small that clock is? Yeah, this ain't going to fit in there, right? No, that's way too big. So that's why I actually make this daughter board, so these will fit into the window of these guys. I can also do that on Centurion and the GE Super Bass, but the GE Super Bass is not, you won't see many of these on GEs because that's a really tough one. But I'll make a video of me doing one of these with a GE Super Bass. Yeah, GE Super Bass with a frequency counter, really nice. Alright, so that's the update. I remounted this display using this little wooden popsicle stick here, kept it level, and then I was able to go back and forth and fine tune it to fit this window perfectly. Alright, 73 is Bruce. Be cool.